Hello, this is Shannon Flummerfelt from Flip Schools. Welcome to the Understanding Instruction series. This video is designed for central office administrators, and it'll just be a short video that'll give you a chance to think about how to examine mission in order to understand instruction. First of all, let's start off with the definition of mission. As a central office administrator, I'm sure you're very familiar with this definition, but perhaps there's one extra twist to it, and that is that mission describes what the purpose of your organization is, actually what it does. And I'd also like to add the concept here to mission, that mission should provide value-added framing for you so that when you're thinking about or intending to do something, planning to do something, making decisions to do something, and actually doing something, that there's a value-added bit of thinking there that connects that to mission. So for instance, one of these two examples of mission might possibly closely represent what your mission is in your district. These are pretty typical mission statements. The first one is, the mission of our district is to help all students to become lifelong learners. So in terms of thinking about what this means as value-added thinking, what you would do is you would begin to connect any intentions, planning, decision-making, and actions by deciding whether or not those are value-added to the mission of your district. So, lifelong learning, what does that mean? How do I add value to that for my students? Another example might be, your mission might say something like this: the mission of our district is to help all students to develop skills for the 21st century. Again, with a value-added component to that, you would begin to examine your mission in order to understand instruction. Do we have value-added components going on in instruction that actually help students to develop skills for the 21st century? One of the issues that we find is that a lot of times mission statements are adrift or afloat from the actual work that goes on in the instructional processes, in the instructional activity that occurs in a district. So we want to try to really encourage a connection to mission by thinking about what's value added to that in terms of instruction. So as we're working to understand instruction, we can begin to ask some of these questions. And the reason that it's important to take a moment and pause and reflect about whether or not something's value added. For instance, when we look at the Flip Schools option and what's possible in terms of recording lectures and using screencast technology and so on, we need to be able to understand, first of all, what is in it for us in terms of our mission. And if you start with mission, it provides a principle-based approach to flipping your school or flipping your district. If you create a flipped culture or flipped operation separate from mission, then again you just start to drift further and further away. So what we begin to do is take a look at mission statement and begin to understand what happens to mission in the flipped environment or in any environment at all that would create value-added activity to that. So for instance, we can begin to ask questions like, what would the deliverables of instruction be that produce lifelong learners? Well, in a flipped environment, we begin to understand that things like student empowerment, student choice, the ability for students to be able to get more personalized and individualized attention so that they can not just take a stock approach to learning, but really be understood as learners. Those kinds of deliverables of instruction are important. If those are in place, we understand that those actually are value added for the mission statement, that it makes sense to go ahead and move forward with flipping. Another question, a really interesting one for us in this age of standardized testing programs: how are lifelong learning outcomes assessed? So if our instructional mission is to create lifelong learners, then we need to be assessing that. How do we do that? So again, if we move into a flipped environment, it's possible to be able to create classroom time for learning activities, for project-based learning, and so on. And these are some ways for us to be able to begin to assess some of the lifelong learning outcomes that are important to our mission. What does instruction look like that fosters lifelong learning? Again, we need to drill this down a little bit and make sure that we understand in the flipped classroom what's occurring instructionally. Does that create a value-added proposition for our mission if it is to become lifelong learners? Another example, go through the same line of thinking, for instance, as a central office administrator. If you're looking at the mission of your district in order to help students to develop skills for the 21st century, well, first of all, we need to begin to understand what are the deliverables of instruction that produce skills for the 21st century. Do we get closer to that in the flipped environment or not? If we flip classrooms and flip schools and so on, are we doing that absent from mission, or is it value added? So if we begin to look at this, what are some of the skills for the 21st century? The ability to work on teams, to problem solve, to communicate, the ability to be able to sort through information and make good decisions with it. All of these sets of skills that futurists talk about, we need to understand that those are actually aligned or value added with our mission. Then it makes sense to move into the flipped environment. And then again, how do we assess these skills for the 21st century? These aren't technical, content-based skills. Many of them are competency-based, or what we would call soft skills. So again, how do we assess these? Does the flipped environment get us closer to being able to create value-added activity for our mission or not? And then what does instruction look like that fosters skills for the 21st century? Are teachers able to, in the flipped environment, really drive down and create that problem-solving environment where there's inquiry-based learning going on? Does it give students a chance to work in teams, to be able to be engaged in social learning and all of the components of the 21st century skill set? So again, as we move into the flipped environment and begin to consider flipping classrooms, flipping schools, flipping districts, we need to make sure that whatever we do is truly a value add for the mission of the district and not keep them as separate activities. They should be closely coupled and connected. Well, I hope that this brief video has prompted some of your thinking about ways to understand instruction through the Flip School movement. If you'd like more information, you can go to the Flip Institute website at the hyperlink on the slide. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video.